You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Hello, this is Donald J. Trump, and I have some important advice. Really huge advice, okay? It's tremendous advice. You should turn off this show right now, okay? Like, immediately. Snarky Faith? Seriously? What the hell is that? Stuart whatever, Ben whatever, two losers with microphones, okay? Both of them total lightweights. They're just weak, okay? Pathetic, really. Believe me, I know, and they should be fired. Like, immediately. Do yourself a favor and stop listening right now. This is Donald J. Trump, and I do not endorse Snarky Faith.
Ben, I'm beginning to think it was a bad idea for us to get a new sponsor for the show. Yeah. I just, I was all about taking the Trump money for being the new sponsor for Snarky Faith, and I'm kind of having a little bit of misgivings.
You should have just been more discerning.
But
speaking of which,
yeah,
we don't have a sarcasm button today.
Oh, yeah, no.
So I was thinking about doing like a sarcasm, what do you call it? Sarcasm impression.
Okay, so
maybe
this will be an impression show apparently.
Yeah.
So yes, it's my fault. I fully will take all of the 50 lashes that you'll dole out later for forgetting our sarcasm button.
Sarcasm.
That'll work.
People are going to know that it's me, but...
Well, good. Hopping directly in on the show today, because we are focused. Focused like...
Laser focused.
Like never before.
Yeah.
Until we're not. So I'll just lay that out there.
The bar is pretty low for being focused.
It is. I had a new listener of ours converse with me in the interwebs, and one thing he had said is, "I love your guys' tangents."
Oh, really?
So he did. That was the quote.
Well, thank you.
I love the tangents.
That is not a point of esteem in my profile, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. No. I think we always have fun, random rabbit trails.
It's good to know that people stick around for 30 minutes while we're on a 30-minute binge tangent.
Yes, they're like, oh gosh, where are they going with this? And they eventually figure out they have no idea, do they?
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
We don't have enough interesting stuff to say, so we'll just go on a tangent. I don't know if it's that. I think it's more...
Because that makes it sound like it's planned.
Yeah.
And I don't think the tangents are really ever planned on our behalf.
It's more that my brain doesn't stay focused very well. So
yes. We like to dine on red herrings.
Yes.
As we go around there.
Exactly.
I don't know. That was too random there. So, I wanted to bring up a topic this week that kind of transpired through some weird mediums. I had gotten invited to be part of a LinkedIn group with folks that kind of work in religious surroundings. I don't want to necessarily say they're all clergy, but they were it was just a conversation group. And for the most part, and this is probably not something I should tell everybody, I'm one of those people that on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, if you ask me to connect, I would rarely say no. And so this group, I got asked to be in this group, and I was like, sure, let's be a part of this. And so one of their topics they had, which ended up being quite fascinating, was about soul care and pastor burnout. And so I literally did not contribute much of anything to this conversation that was happening. They'd posted it was a article that we have actually here that we'll delve into a bit. So it's called Soul Care and the Roots of Clergy Burnout by Anne Dillenschneider. I don't even know if that's true. And the only reason I got this, because if anyone listens for any period of time knows I cannot pronounce any complicated last name. Ben usually covers for me. But I had my wife actually read it out loud for me ahead of time, so I was prepping, and she's good with that kind of
stuff. She's better than I am.
Oh, she's good stuff in there. And so someone had posted this article on there, and then they had this whole clergy conversation. You've got pastors and priests and lay people all really talking about it. And at the end of it, I ended up just hopping in the conversation saying, hey, this is a great dialogue that you guys have going here. Do you mind if I talk about it on this radio show that I host? And a few of them said yes. Like, I didn't have any no's, but a few people said yes. So for those that said yes, we will eventually, I'll use their names, but the rest of them, I will just refer to them in vague terms, like clergy guy that I'm assuming is a priest because his profile picture, he had a collar on. And so I don't think that that's going to out anybody too much. So there's a bunch of outraged clergy that are like, what is he talking about me? No. But one thing, like, so Ben, you and I have played the role of pastor, and we have been pasteurized over our career at some point.
We have,
and it's not a pleasant process.
No.
But going through that, have you experienced, when you've worked in the ministry in the past, have you experienced the thing that they call burnout?
I'd probably not to the degree of people who have, let's see, I was a pastor for, I think, like 4 years maybe or so. So, I just want to defer to the people who have gone like 30 years. But yeah, in that time, definitely, I don't know, it's a little more complicated for me as well because I didn't really go into it kind of gung-ho, like I really want to be a pastor. I don't have anything against pastors. I just feel like at that point, I had seen so many other people that were good at it that I kind of knew that my skill set was not as good as theirs. And I had a very different skill set, I think. So I tried my best, tried to fit it. I was actually asked to become a pastor of this congregation, whereas I think, I won't say a lot of people, but there are definitely many people in clergy or in ministry that just feel very passionate and we call it called in the evangelical circles. That is what they want to do. They're very passionate about it. So I think that is a much steeper decline in burnout. For me, I think there was a lot more question at the beginning of, what am I doing? Am I really like right to do this? So, but definitely, a year or two, it really wears on you. And just to throw another log on the fire, our church was mobile. So we met in a classroom on UNC's campus. So, and actually, while I was pastor, I think we met in like probably 4 or 5 different classrooms because we kept having to move for various reasons. And we would set our church up and then break it down. So there,
you're portable.
Yes. Yeah. And let me tell you, it might sound pleasant or cool or whatever. It makes it like twice as hard because you have to get stuff there. You're getting there a lot, pretty early, and then you have to get everything on and working. And then, then you have to like break it down afterwards. You're responsible for all that stuff. You're responsible if something, breaks down. And I know that's something you get into a lot, just the fact that church is kind of a building and like a budget for stuff and, for the performance on Sunday and all that stuff. And and we weren't working with, our budget was like minute compared to most churches. So there was a lot of pressure in that. And we made things work. If stuff broke, we would just, pull out a guitar or just sing but I don't know. There was a lot of, it just added this other level of work. And, Kelly and I both felt like Sundays were not days of rest for us.
That's very true.
And then, I think other pastors, especially who have like older congregations or who have like families and things like that, you're doing a lot of visiting during the week. And we didn't have to do quite as much of that, but we did have a couple of people with very extreme life circumstances that happen. College is a very kind of, big things happen in college. So, in those times, I think that was really stressful and, things just kind of pile up over time and it's pretty tough to keep going.
Well, I think that one of the interesting dualities that when you begin to talk about this, because, there could be folks listening to this and saying, well, I work a job. I also work a job in X industry, and it's also a thankless job that whatever happens
Sure,
all the time.
sure, yeah.
So this isn't necessarily something that's exclusive to that, but I think that what begins to complicate the issue when you begin to work within a church is that whole thing, and it's something that, depending upon where you're at, I think it's either intentionally or not intentionally manipulated. But this whole thing, like this dance between vocation and calling.
Yeah, right.
And because on some level of it, you have a job and you get paid to do a job. But on another level of it, for those that have stepped into ministry, I mean, there's this whole other thing that we would refer to as a calling, like something that feels like it's tugging at you, that God wants you to be in this role and doing whatever it is that you're doing in said role. And so I think that whole thing of that nature of calling, it feels like something larger than vocation. And so I think that those two things, like held side by side, there's crossover at times, but I think it also makes things ripe for burnout. Within my career, I've worked for numerous churches across the landscape of America, and I've had America. I have experienced burnout and other things of the nature that I could probably dive deeper into, but won't. But some of it comes from working on staff that has an unhealthy staff culture or unhealthy expectations. I mean, just because there's the assumption that somehow just because you're in the church, it means that you should somehow have life together better, but. There's broken people in the pews of the church, and there's broken people behind the pulpit of the church. And a lot of times within certain staff cultures, it can be quite unhealthy and really difficult. Like I had one of those difficult situations early on in my whole ministry career where I was working for an incredibly unhealthy church. And it was, if it wasn't for somebody that I had on staff that was with me, he was my kind of like catharsis, my person that we could kind of sit and just vent about. Like, I don't think I would have even lasted as long as I did there because it was just so tremendously wacko, behind the scenes and actually in front of the scenes a little bit. But it oftentimes amazes me how much the congregation's willing to put up with a bit of wacko to just continue to come back every week. But so no, I've been in good situations where I've experienced burnout. I've been in bad situations where I've experienced burnout, and so this is one of those things that kind of hits close to home for me, and some of it probably is my own baggage that I carry, with me that may lean me towards burnout in certain roles. Anyways, just because of how I was raised in work ethics or workaholic ethics type stuff like that too. So that probably doesn't lend itself for me to do very well in a lot of these situations. But there's other factors that end up, you can be in a situation that you're just saying like, I'm drunk and I'm probably not in a good situation. But then if you go and snort a line of Coke, you've just exacerbated the whole situation. You know what I mean? Like, so it's, so there's sometimes like those perfect storms that you find yourself in that just make it way worse.
And I think one thing that can get difficult with clergy that I found, at least with our age range was typically between, it was like 18 to 21. And it's really hard to work a helping, like sort of a service job or a helping job and not see some sort of result.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that, no pastors ever see people sort of helped. And, there were definitely plenty of times where someone would say, I really appreciate what you said, or that sort of stuff. But to really see a sort of a life change in someone, or, that, and I think people are in it to help, and they want to, however they frame this, they want to see people kind of get better or feel fulfilled. And let's be honest, like, unless you're, Tony Robbins, like motivational speaking up in front of people, you're not going to see real sort of substantial change really often. And I think it's good to be there for people, but for me, like with college students, a lot of that being there was supporting them in their like, sort of vocational pursuits, or supporting them in the struggles of college. And sometimes they felt menial or trivial, but they're real. Anxiety is real. College is a really tough time, but you're not a lot of times, I mean, I did deal with some of this, but I think in sort of a greater context, you're dealing with like death and birth and stuff like that. And, you know, sort of helping people through that can be fulfilling. But again, it's just tough to not, when you're not seeing a lot of fruit, then you start asking the question, like, am I doing this right? Sometimes I think people just say, you know, and this is getting into this LinkedIn discussion a little bit, but like, how do you define success in a church? And I think some people would say, well, it's, you know, how many fannies are in the pew or whatever. And that gets them by. And I think those sorts of personalities tend to persist and tend to be fine. You know, I did work with someone, and I mean, I do have respect. This guy had a really good work ethic, and I mean, he was a good father and this and that. But I mean, his sort of approach to ministry was you go out, you go through the way of the master or whatever formula for like evangelizing people, quote unquote, which meant like sort of doing this mental like magic trick where you try to sort of get people convinced that they need to go to your church. And then, you know, and a lot of that is, to his credit, he did sort of like follow up, and I think he wanted the community to be there afterwards. But I think for a lot of people, it's as long as you get them into the church and they're saying, you know, X, Y, and Z, I'm a Christian, then you can feel like, wow, I converted like 10 people this week.
You've assimilated them.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly.
Which reminds me of, were you ever a Star Trek person
like
at all?
Star Trek, yeah.
The Borg, yes, yeah. That is.
You're a part of the Borg. You're part of the hive.
The way of the master Borg techniques. With it, no, but I think you are on to something with how you're saying that the metric, and I think that a lot of this conversation will come back to metrics.
Yeah.
And how we gauge success. I mean, you'd said fannies in the pews. The old like term, I don't know if it's a Southern Baptist term, it's like nickels and noses.
No, I've never heard that one, but that sounds very Southern.
You know, yeah, it is. Like nickels and noses, the idea of how much money you're bringing in and how many butts or fannies. We'll keep this, it's a family show, right, Ben? No, you know, and how many butts are in the seats type of a thing, too. And so you use that as a metric for what we would call success.
Right.
And which I mean, is very much an American consumer model of success, or it's a very maybe the better word, a corporate model for success. Because again, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to have, you know, measurable, you know, results. Or I'd
it's
heard,
scientific.
Yeah, it is. Like what is someone had told me this once. Like whatever is measured can be managed.
Yeah,
you know, one of those kind of things. Yeah. And but my pushback to all of that is when you begin to try to put concrete metrics on the idea of faith and spirituality, it gets a little weird.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? It comes to a place where you end up having to, first of all, like how are we establishing metrics? You know, how are we establishing what we're going to measure? How are we going to do that? And is that something when you begin to kind of delve into the world of faith and spirituality, that can be a little bit like wibbly wobbly and how we kind of win. It can be very problematic. And so like diving into like Dylan Schneider's article, she is She is a clinical counselor and begins to talk through these other articles that have been like in the New York Times and some other like health initiatives. And so she begins to quote about the health initiative at Duke Divinity School that published a new report on the poor mental and physical health of pastors. And so then what you begin to kind of cull out of some of these articles that she's talking about, she was kind of saying is what these articles are saying, and she doesn't necessarily agree with it, was that it's simple, like, right, you know, you can cure burnout in these 5 steps. You know, it's the pastor needs to have better boundaries to engaging self-care, and also better boundaries to putting on the brakes on the demands of the congregational members. So as long as you do more and have better boundaries, you can fix that. But I think what she brings to the whole conversation, which I think is really great for her being a clinical counselor, she begins to say that it's not that simple. It's not that easy when we begin to talk about pastor burnout. And I like that she brought up this term when you begin to look deeper into it, she was actually beginning to refer that it's not simply burnout; it's almost like starvation that folks are going through. It's almost as if their souls are starved in that, and I think that's different. Like burnout, I think just brings with it connotations of I'm just doing too much. But I think the idea of starvation begins to speak into the fact that it's not like your soul is not being fed.
Right.
And so those are kind of two ends of the spectrum, which I think that there's probably some interplay between both of those about not having an off switch. That's been some of my experience when I was doing pastoral work, is the fact that there isn't an off time.
No, definitely not. Well, I mean, the way I always thought of it is your job is to be available. And that, I mean, you're on call like all the time. I mean, definitely we would practice what we called like Sabbath, where, we would say this week out of the year we're doing vacation and I'm not, or, we would also have like our date night and I'm like, I'm not answering my phone. I'm not, paying attention to anyone but my wife tonight. But I mean, even in those times we would talk about church or, we would plan, or when I would get like, usually we went to the beach on that week. That was kind of my time, but inevitably I would be like sermon planning or, I would just be worried about, what are we doing the next year? And so, I mean, Sabbath is never really Sabbath. You're not really resting. But I like that starvation idea because I think also it's hitting at like, you're not filling a need. I mean, everybody has like certain sort of basic needs, and starvation implies that by kind of, I think pastors especially, like they think of themselves as sort of giving of themselves, or it's like a sacrifice for others and it's a good thing. But then, when your health is going downhill, or, I mean, we haven't brought this up yet, but I mean, it's not just the pastor, it's the pastor's family.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I mean, really, a lot of times pastors' families make more sacrifices than the pastors. And that's not an indictment. That's just, I think it's how it is. I think a lot of pastors feel that for their family and they want to protect them. But, it's you are kind of the mother or the father to everyone in your congregation. So then you're having to sort of protect your time for your family, and it just, I don't know, there is sort of these basic needs that are not being met because you feel like, again, you were talking about boundaries. You feel like there are no boundaries because I should be available to everyone all the time. That's my sacrifice. That's my calling.
Well, and what begins to happen, and you're right, I think it's an apt thing to bring up, the idea of the PK, the pastor's kid, which generally is thought of, in a lot of scenarios, the pastor's kids are thought of as these awful little demons. In a lot of congregations, simply just because they have been pushed aside most of their life, because in order to be a pastor, I mean, I think that you have to begin to set up this whole like veneer of who you are. It's almost like an actor on stage. There's the roles that you play, and then there's your private life, within it. Like I was listening to, it was over the week, I was listening to Mark Maron's W2F podcast, and it had, now I can't think of his name. Step Brothers. We'll play.
Cal Naughton Jr., that guy.
Yeah, O'Reilly. His last name is Riley.
Bill.
No, it's not Bill O'Reilly.
Not Bill O'Reilly.
Oh my gosh, I've been talking about him all week. Yeah, or Dr. Steve Brule, if you know who that. No, so it'll hit me in a second. But he was what I found fascinating was. If anyone's ever listened to Maron's podcast, he just does an excellent job of really being able to kind of dive into people's personal lives and talk about it. And what Riley was talking about was he believes he has had a longer career in Hollywood is because he doesn't reveal anything about himself. Like so it's this idea that whatever you see on screen, John C. Reilly, that's it, okay, yeah. Whatever you see on screen is a character, and his personal life is something that's completely private. And I think that you can work that in an entertainment industry, which you can also, on the flip side, say church is a little bit of an entertainment industry. But I think that this whole idea, it's like you have to have this veneer of who you are on stage, at the same time being able to say that you're very transparent, you're very open, And so then there's like this whole pushback of like, what is your sacred space? Like, what is your home space? Because again, for any kind of a pastor, your kids are on like the spotlight all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that they're constantly being watched in that. And I think that like roping this continued to back in with Dylan Schneider's article, and we hit on this a little bit, but some of these things I just found very fascinating. So she was saying that pastors who are effective and get things done are considered successful. So the idea that the pastorate, the role of the clergy, has become about metrics and success. And when you begin to look at this has been something that's kind of been coming on since she was charting back like to the 1920s. That it's something that's been really ramping up to that. That again, what we'd said is it's about getting more money in the church, and it's about getting more butts in the pews. And so that becomes your goal, which is very different than cultivating the spiritual formation of people.
Now, can I go on can we go on a little tangent?
You can.
Yeah, because that just makes me, this is one of my pet peeves in the American church right now, especially the evangelical church, when you're talking about that sort of, the pressure is on as a pastor to be successful, and success is measured sort of in these metrics like numbers and profit or revenue or whatever you want, profit, and then people in the seats. And kind of what you don't see when you're a part of one of these sort of mega successful, I'm doing air quotes. We really need an air quotes button.
Okay, I'll write that down.
These successful churches, what you're not seeing is that it is killing other churches. So there are these sort of smaller, like not just startup churches, but churches that have been around for a while and then are serving a really good purpose. And they're stamped out because these kind of Walmart churches just continue to expand. Because the point of it, the like end goal of these things is to be, it literally is like capitalism in a church. It's infinite expansion. It's we will get as big as we can because it's kind of like built on this premise of, the bigger we are, the more successful we are. Like God is growing our church.
Yeah.
So sort of the flip side of that, and I'm just saying this because I want to put it out there in space so that people will have this in their heads as a problem, is that there are other churches that get subsumed because some people just I don't know, they just don't know. It's like, where do I go? Yeah. And they're not going to go to like the corner church. So just to like paint a picture of one of these tiny churches, there was an amazing church, probably the most exciting, I don't know other like adjectives to call it. It was just, I felt like my heart like almost exploded when I was in this church. It was like
in a good way?
Yes, in a good way.
Okay.
No, they didn't like feed me adrenaline or something. It was a church in a downtown, and it was like 80% people who lived on the streets.
I know this church.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. And I loved their pastor while they were around.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was, and I didn't know her at this point, but we had just kind of concluded being pastoral, and we were like, we're going to go around and just see all these churches around the area that we had always heard about, but we had never been able to kind of connect with. And this place was just amazing. I mean, it wasn't huge, but the idea behind it and the fact that people, and not just like a pastor, definitely there was a lot of hard work from the pastoral staff, but also like the people were fighting for the church. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone felt they had a place there. Everything was sort of clicking, and it wasn't huge, but I would call that definitely successful. Mm-hmm. To me, I looked at it, I'm like, this is what church should be. And, I'm not necessarily connecting all the reasons here, but churches like that do tend to disappear with the sort of subsuming churches, the mega churches that, because, and again, it's, I know I probably sound like I'm like fighting for the local like stores and stuff, which I am. But you lose kind of the local need or the need that fits like the corner that was filling a need. And and these places exist, and there are places like rural churches that fill a need. I mean, there's a need there, but sort of these growing like mega churches that expand their message and expand kind of what they're doing, and it doesn't fit any sort of local anything. It's just, we're going to continue expanding because that's what God wants us to do. So anyway, that's my tangent.
No, but I think
me off.
I think what you were saying, like it makes my mind go into many different directions. But I remember, this is years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend that was quite my senior, and I remember him talking about the state of radio and how used to, when he would travel across country, you could get the sense of a community by listening to the radio station. But nowadays, you can completely go across country and you will hear the same songs.
Oh yeah,
and they're all just kind of mishmashed together. They've like lost their identity because of this whole drive for success. In the same way, it's almost like you're describing these smaller congregations of people, kind of like independent cinema versus the big action flick that costs $200 million to make, and it's big and it's dumb and it hasn't really been thought out, but it'll be pushed everywhere. It's not really a message piece. It's kind of just like eating junk food for your brain.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of the last time I've seen, and I'm not saying that there's none, but I can't think of the last time I've seen like a really big budget movie that I feel like has moved me.
Yeah.
And then so you can look at this idea of independent cinema, that the voice is very different. The voice is very small, but I think that you're able to kind of get that. It's kind of that dirt under your fingernails feel. And like even the church you were talking about, who's like the pastor, she's a friend of both of ours. And gosh, she's just a wonderful human being. And a lot of the kind of the makeup of that church was a lot of they were a lot of street people that were there every week, every time it was open. So it was almost, in a certain sense, kind of just like it was a mission and it was kind of a church in an area. And when you begin to get to those places where folks can just be raw and real, I would say, and I don't say this a lot, but I think that in those places where folks are really raw and real, I feel like those are the spots where God moves. That's the spots where you like feel the Holy Spirit moving. And these other things that are kind of just shiny, and they are the word you'd used earlier, like the Tony Robbins kind of an idea that in these larger ones where you simply, all they're trying to do is get butts in the seats because they're there to put on a good production, to make you feel good about yourself so you can check that spirituality box, off of your to-do list, but they require little to nothing of you. And the production element of it, it's mainly the same players every week. So again, roping that back into talking about film, I can't think of the last time I went to a movie and much was required of me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I paid my ticket. I'm going to sit in here in the dark and in silence, and that's all this requires of me. And what begins to happen within that is that continues to push us maybe closer to a good corporate paradigm, but it moves us further and further away from really what is the whole purpose of church to begin with, which is never asked in those scenarios.
And I think what ticks me off about it is that you sort of the consequence of that is we're losing, those kind of local flavors. Or like another example would be like a restaurant. Where you could, sure, you could go into McDonald's or, any sort of like chain restaurant. And what's great about being there is you don't have to, you don't panic that you don't know what to pick. You know exactly what you like because it's the same everywhere. Yeah. Versus having to, you find a local restaurant and you're getting sort of a taste of the area. Like barbecue in North Carolina or something.
Oh yeah.
But you don't know, barbecue in Texas and barbecue in North Carolina are completely different. And if you were to go to Texas and say, I want some barbecue, and they hand you brisket, if you were me, you'd be really disappointed. You would be like sort of shocked. So it's, it's kind of the same idea. Yeah. But then kind of connecting this back into burnout, people have, it is such an uphill battle to fight against some of these things, and it just, I think my biggest pet peeve with it is that people will look at the two, especially people who are in the church that's big and making tons of money, and they'll say, "Well, God just didn't want that church to be there," or well, obviously that church wasn't meant to be.
Sure.
And I don't know. That's almost. I mean, we're stamping out great things.
That's such a weird. You're right in how some people would say that.
That's just a wrong definition. That's a wrong.
Well, it
assumption.
is. It's a weird. Yeah, it's a weird thing to assume something, and then which again, I think we've brought up on the show before that. I always have issues when people stamp. Well, God just meant for that to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, it's just a weird idea that for you to say that. I mean, because what begins to happen is, like, if we want to just kind of tease this out a little more, I mean, you're almost speaking of these like megachurch ideas. They're franchises.
Yeah, sure.
That we could say like a fast food franchise. And the thing about a fast food franchise, like, again, like I know what to order at McDonald's if I am in San Diego or if I am in New York. I mean, it doesn't matter where I am, or like Cheyenne, Wyoming. It doesn't really matter. Like, I'm gonna get that product, and it doesn't reflect the people in the community. Versus this idea of what does it mean? And I love that barbecue idea because which tells you like how dumb I am. I remember when I traveled even like through Tennessee, like you will get very different barbecue depending upon where you are. I remember as a kid going to one of my cousin's weddings and they're like, this is Memphis barbecue, which is a dry barbecue.
Right.
And I'm eating it being like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
like isn't it supposed to be like
sauce?
Yeah, where's this? I don't know, it's good. Like I've learned like what that means, but again, that speaks to like the deeper roots and the kind of the ethos of that community. And I think that when anytime a church doesn't somehow speak to the roots of a community, I'm not really sure what you're doing anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it begins to get that. And like in the article that what she brings up, and I just, again, any good reason to mention Niebuhr is a good one, and so like she begins to say like, this is back, I think in the 1920s, like when Niebuhr observed that the clergy had become, as he put it, a pastoral directors who focused on the administration tasks of managing and maintaining the church for the benefit of the denomination.
Right.
And you
like
begin
CEO,
to see this. It's a CEO role. And I can't think of many organizations that you'd be like, man, the CEO of this company, he's such a good spiritual director.
Yeah.
He's such a good facilitator of spiritual formation.
Yeah.
No, his
he
job
has grown me as a person.
Yeah, but his job and you may have some people in corporate America say that because he's grown them in the way of teaching them how to do exactly what I do, type of a thing, like to where,
replicate my company.
Yes, we are a product and you're going to churn it out. And I think the problem is that we've seen with Christianity in America, we begin to see, like you said this way at the beginning of the show, that again, we define metrics. So what does it mean? I need to get people saved. And so saved means we have to check this, and this off. And then I need to put them through a program of discipleship, which means do this, and this. And then after all these things are completed, then we need to somehow get them back serving into the church. And somehow that is what God meant for everything. That is what it means to follow God, is that you had this checked off, and now you're just helping back, make the machine keep going.
You're Thetan level like 4 now.
Yes.
Or clear level. Well, I don't know my Scientology language, but I mean, it really is like that.
If you knew it better, I'd probably worry.
Yeah.
No,
Plus, I'll have the lawyers coming after me.
That's that's right. Because wasn't you need to be audited somehow?
We'll have Trump and Scientology after us. That is not a good combo.
Oh, we're
never
done.
last.
Yes. So this has been a great last show. I really appreciate you guys being with us for all these years. But when you look at this, I mean, I think that any way that you try to somehow package up and make faith and spirituality like a product, it has a different fit for different people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like you have some folks that it will come easy to. You have some folks that will come hard to. Like some will. All I'm saying is, I guess it's rarely a straight path between point A and point B. Yeah. It's not something that you can necessarily throw into the. I don't know, and make just.
So it depends on what type of ground the seed falls onto that it will grow.
Very true. That sounds very Jesus-y.
Or or that there are different parts of the body that do different things and are good at different types of things.
So I mean, I think that when we begin to talk about, I mean, you're right. I mean, like
it's just stamping out diversity.
It is. I think it absolutely is. I think it's the diversity between what it takes for a person to be able to begin to process faith, begin to process, is God real? Is God there? Is God speaking to me? Is God moving in my life? I mean, it's going to look different for everybody because we all enter this at different points and we all experience it at different points and we all turn away from it and turn back to it and then turn away from it. I mean, all of those things. And I think that the idea of stamping out diversity, like you're saying, I think it actually stamps out the beauty of it. You know what I mean? It stamps out what makes it unique. And I think that our churches need that diversity in faith. And I think the fact that we've come to a place of stamping out diversity ends up making it something that is much like an assembly line when we're looking at this. And when you begin to talk about pastors' burnout, I mean, I think a lot of that happens because, again, you're making a product.
Yeah.
Like you may or may not see life change, or you may, but they're in smaller doses within that. And so it's just a bad cycle. Like
or if you're trying to do it in a way other than this kind of like corporate model that we have, it's such an uphill battle. I can tell you firsthand that, and I won't mention any names or anything. So basically, there was actually a not local sort of mega church type thing that sent a little, what would you call it? Like a little drone, into UNC's campus.
You mean down from the summit? Like where
No. It's not Summit. Okay. So
sorry.
this is not anyone in the area.
Ben, you are above bar. I am not. Calling people out. Sorry.
But basically there was a little drone sent from a mega church, and this group of people, they didn't really have a ton of oversight, which was part of it, but they went around to different ministries and actually started sort of planting seeds of like distrust and saying things like, you have adults in leadership and you're in college. What do they know about you? You should be leading the church, which is funny because in our church, that was the model. We wanted the students leading. And plus I was in my like 20s at that point. So, I'm not that far from it, but anyway, so I don't know. It was hard to fight against that.
Yes.
Because for one, like I just am not that confrontational, so I'm not going to go seek these people out and like chew them out.
Hey, what are you doing here? Yeah.
But I mean, that's like, and not that, I don't know if that's kind of a common thing.
So would this be a church that would be the byline of Star Wars Episode 4?
No. It's not that church either.
Oh, okay.
No.
Sorry.
Like I said, it's not local. It's not like...
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's always fun to me.
to try to draw out.
Yes.
But, and that's sort of an explicit, like, having to fight against things. And then you have the implicit or the less, I guess, obvious, where, things are so branded everywhere, which again is a corporate thing. There's like a brand that you see like signs and stickers and shirts and all this sort of stuff. Not
signs and wonders, signs and stickers?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's what Jesus meant by sign.
It was signs and stickers.
Sarcasm. That wasn't very good.
I will pay for this. I apologize. I forgot to bring the iPad to our studio.
But just there's this sort of like implicit, like, well, that's where you go to church, or this was another thing I saw, that if you are part of this denomination, you would go to this not technically denominational church. And that might have been more of a college thing, because in college it's not cool to go to like such and such first denominational church on such road. So you go to like the cool big church that has the like fog machines and stuff. So I don't know, but anyway, just to kind of give you a flavor of like, if you're in a smaller church and your budget is like, I think our budget was maybe $5,000 a year or something. I mean, you're dealing with college students. They're poor, basically. So, you have a tiny budget. Basically you can afford to fix what you have and then get some free food, hopefully, because that's why some college students will come, at least at the beginning of the year. And then, other churches have, I actually read in a magazine, I think I mentioned this before, on like sound equipment or sound design for the small church, which someone in my life handed me this article and was like, this might help you. I don't think they read it. And they were like, so if you're on a small church budget of about $1 million a year, I was like, what? Whoa.
Yeah, that's tiny.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how you can afford like communion wafers.
Like I couldn't even dream of having
Sure.
$1 million a year coming into our church. So, you know, I mean, and that's the small end. That a lot of churches are just their uphill battle is like next to impossible to stay afloat against some of these like huge. I mean, I can't even imagine what a big church budget is.
Well, and what begins to happen though, like in this system, because again, I think going back to like what she was saying in the article here was that and this is something that like it speaks to me deeply, and I don't even completely know why, but like until like the 1920s, a pastor was known as like the cure for souls or a curator of souls. You know, this idea that you are helping people to locate themselves in God's greater story, and I think there's a beauty to that, and I think that there's also there's a lot of nebulous to what that looks like. And there's a lot of things that don't fit into metrics when we're talking about that. And, you know, you begin to look at it today, like what you're talking about, Ben, too, where churches become just a place for programs, where a pastor is a person that just manages programs. If we have enough programs, we can get enough people doing these things. Mm-hmm. And I think especially in these larger cases, I mean, I think spiritual formation happens, but I think it usually happens by accident. You know, meaning that life happens and God somehow works through the cracks of what's going on in these places. And I think that what begins to happen deeper, I think that you're at this place, okay? So you're a pastor, and you need the people to be doing X, Y, and Z. And one of the reasons burnout happens is because you're not doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
You know, it's that whole like do as I say, but not as I do type of a thing. Mm-hmm. Or I've read enough leadership books that I get sick of them after. You know what I mean? But like that your people are not going to go where you're not willing to go.
Yeah.
And so I think that what begins to happen within that is that you just have to, you're ramping up the product, but you may not be tending to your soul, and you may just be running ragged, and it's just a bad cycle to where there's really not a break from it.
Yeah.
There's really not, you know, a time where you're able to just get out and be able to like fully rest or even fully be with family, because again, like nowadays with us having phones on us and everything else with us, you know, those text messages are going to buzz. This need's going to happen. Whether it's a great need or whether it's just even a dumb superficial need, you are still, you know, running out of this. And so I think through this, you begin to have a place where, yes, you get dry, you get weary, you get bitter, but at the same time, you're leading people dry and weary and bitter. And I think that it begins to lead them into areas where they probably shouldn't go. And you know, as we're beginning to get a little bit short on time here, you know, I'm going to dive in a little bit to some of the stuff that I found in that discussion group that I mentioned earlier in the show. And what I love, there was this guy, and I'll just refer to him as the priest guy, because that sounds official. At least his profile picture, because I asked in the group, I was like, hey, can I quote you guys? And like a few people said, sure. But priest guy, I will not call him that, but he had a collar on. He looked distinguished because priests with collars always look distinguished.
Collars are red.
Yeah, but I think that like, you know, he was taking this out, and he was an older guy that said, you know, he'd been in ministry like for over 4 decades. And, you know, I think that he says that you begin to have this issue with this, and we said it earlier a little bit, between God calling and then versus a job, you know, of what does it look like to be faithful with versus what does it look like to be successful. And, you know, one of his things that he was kind of just ending with was this idea that God, or he's, I guess, looking into the story, he was saying someone had told him this years ago that really affected how he ministered to folks, was that God, you know, someone had told him, God doesn't want you to spend time in meetings. You know, your calling is to be faithful and not successful. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because again, if you look back to the Bible, if you look back to even just the model of Jesus, which was really the inception, that was kind of the seeds that were planted for the church to begin. You've got really just 12 guys hanging around you, plus other stragglers that are kind of in the mix. And, you know, your whole movement ends in you getting murdered.
Right.
You know,
success is kind of flipped on its head at that point.
Yeah. I mean, like, you're like, okay, here's step 1, begin to preach. Step 2, perform miracles. Step 3, get killed.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if that book would do quite well. Everybody like, oh, yes, yes, preach, yes, miracles. Oh, certainly. I'm just going to skip the last chapter.
That's your like punchline in your motivational speech. Tony Robbins ends with, and if you should all go get killed. Yeah, you should die.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Well, Everything else he said was so great. I just ignored the end of it and moved on.
I mean, I guess technically resurrection would be the punchline, but
sure, yeah.
But you definitely, I think we tend to skip the death part and just go straight to the resurrection.
We do, and what that did for the followers, you know, what
Right.
that did for the people that would eventually start the early church. You know, the idea that Jesus gets beaten and stuck up on a cross to die, and they all run away.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. This isn't like, I don't know, what business model can we derive out of all of this?
Yeah.
I
only want one person in my church.
And I will tell you, someone has wrote a BS, you know, version of how like we can be successful like Jesus through those steps.
Oh, really?
There has to have been. Come on.
Yeah.
You know, there's such good Christian books out there. So many good ones.
Sarcasm.
Yeah. But no, but within that, I think that like what was interesting that some of the folks that were in this whole like the conversation were even talking about we need to really rejigger what successful means to us. You know, what was successful in Jesus' times? What is successful in the 21st century? You know, what is successful now? And I think what's even interesting, and I understand what they're getting at when they say, like, we need to figure out what success means in the context. But I think even on the flip side, I can't imagine in the first century that what Jesus did was successful. You know what I mean? Like, culturally speaking, like, oh, that guy, he did the whole thing. He preached miracles and he got killed. You know, that's how we perceive success back here, right?
Well, can I bring in a little Kierkegaard?
Please.
One thing I love in Kierkegaard's exegesis, I think he wants to point out that we need to actually get into the mind of a character in Scripture.
I like it.
So, I mean, just imagine being like one of Jesus's followers minutes after, you know, when you said like everyone scatters, he's dead. That sort of mindset of success rather than kind of having the like retrospect. You know, we have thousands of years of retrospect.
Very true.
So let's like cut that out and try to empathize with what people are feeling in the moment.
It was a Debbie Downer moment for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, we need to take those feelings seriously. We need to take that kind of like moment in time seriously. That's not necessarily going to be every single person's experience, but that is a very valid, almost centerpiece of the story, and it's very human. Whereas I think people want to avoid that kind of feeling and say, well, Jesus did that. You know, we don't have to. That really, I mean, I think it validates that, because who were the people that he was spending most of his time with throughout the story? The people that he eventually, you know, he kind of modeled that in the end, that he was abandoned and that there was violence done to him, that sort of stuff. So instead of defining success by like skipping all the other stuff and saying, well, Jesus did all that stuff and now you don't have to. Rather, I mean, we should really entertain, like, how did those people feel at that point? Yeah. And maybe we can validate feeling that in the present. Yeah, that's one of my fascinations. I remember I've done a few different Easter services, and I hate how Easter is portrayed, because it's always, again, like what you're saying, it's kind of in just looking at it in the past, so like, yay, it's a victory day. And I don't think we ever dwell enough in how horrible it was before that moment. Yeah. Like, we skip that human moment where like nothing makes sense. And I'm fascinated with that moment more than I'm actually fascinated with resurrection. I don't know what's wrong with me because of that. Shame on you. No, but even how you're saying this, I mean, I think that, you know, one of the reasons, and I guess as we're beginning to move to the end of this conversation, I mean, when we begin to talk about pastor burnout, I think you have to go back to saying, well, what is wrong with the church? I mean, I think it's a bigger, and we've danced around that the entire, you know, hour of talking here, is the fact that we've set ourselves up, for failure. I mean, you know, if the whole idea is having somebody that is spiritually alive and walking with God, would the structure that we have right now facilitate that best for people? And I would go back to saying is no. I mean, I think it creates something. You know, it's like I have a machine that makes donuts, but my intention behind it is really that I want to eat filet mignon. You know, but I'm going to try really hard with this donut machine to get filet mignon out of it. And that is going to drive me insane, because this machine is not meant to get these results. And then we get stuck in a process of trying to, like, you know, it's like Square,
square peg round hole type of a thing. And I think I think a lot of the burnout happens is that we're told we're supposed to do a product by doing these steps, but it's like, it'd be like getting like something from IKEA and having the directions to something else from IKEA.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You're just like, well, I don't get this. Like, I don't.
But you really needed the florum.
Yes, you're better, at pronouncing those great. But you know what I mean. But it's like, we're doing something and we're trying really hard and we're putting a lot of money into this, and it's not giving us what we ultimately want, and it's burning out pastors. And I will tell you at the same time, it's not benefiting the congregations. Mm-hmm. I don't think somehow pastors just like self-crucifying themselves, is the answer for spiritual healthy congregations. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
And so I just think that we get hung up on the wrong things, and I just think that we are, we're driving north on Highway 85, and we're really hoping to get to Miami.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, we can try all we want, but, we're just on the wrong path for that. And so I think a lot of burnout happens is because we're caught in the wrong systems for what we're doing, which is probably the beginning of a larger conversation of other proportions that we're getting at. So, I mean, as we're getting to the end of this hour, like, any final thoughts, Ben, as I've rambled and I usually ramble?
Hopefully this open space, that people would take us this seriously, but this open space for pastors to feel like they can be more human, and open space for congregations to understand that pastors are not superhuman and that they really need support as well.
Well, awesome. As we get to, I will just leave it at that because we are out of time. So as we get to the end of this broadcast, just a reminder that you can catch us on podcast at www.snarkyfaith.com. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook. We'd love to hear back from you guys. But that is all that we have this week. And thank you so much for listening again and again. And we just really appreciate you, our listeners. But we are out of time and we are out of here. See you later.
WCOM is listener-supported community radio, and Snarky Faith is only possible through our sponsors. Aqueduct Conference Centre was established in 1978 as a peaceful destination for small group meetings, special events, conferences, retreats, and weddings. For more information, go to www.aqueductcc.com. We are also sponsored by Lumen. Lumen, a spiritual community of seekers, sojourners, question askers, doubters, and skeptics, is a collective of fellow travelers that embrace the truth that all life is sacred, hope is real, and tomorrow can be better than today. All are welcome. You can find more information at www.lumencommunities.com.